All right. Welcome, everyone. My name is Mira. I work with Waterfront Toronto, and I'll be moderating tonight's meeting. I first just want to thank everyone for joining us this evening, for dedicating your time tonight to hearing these updates about this project and talking with our staff. Speaking of whom, I'd like to present the speakers who are going to be taking you through the material this evening. We have with us Sarah Henstock, who's Manager of Community Planning for Toronto and East York with the City of Toronto. Anthony Kittle, who's a project manager for the waterfront with City Community Planning. We have Fred Martin, who's a senior project manager for the waterfront at the city's Indigenous Affairs Office. We have Scott Pennington, who's VP of Portland's Asset Management with CreateTO, and Ray Tasaka, who's Senior Urban Design Manager with Waterfront Toronto. We also have lots of other staff joining us on the call, and they'll be available during the question and answer period of the meeting to address any questions that you all might have for us. So before we get into the meeting, I'd like to ask Fred if he would come up and officially open the meeting for us and get us started.
Jimmy Gwetch, thank you, Mira. Nana Bojo, Ani Tanze, Sego, Indeo, Kwekwe, hello, bonjour. Hello, Nintulusi Maktak, Maktak Indigo, Fred Martin Indigenous Cause, Adik Indo de Magai, Migzi Indo de Magai, Wabinong Nindonjaba. Indinowe Maganadok, all our relations. I say Kichi Manadu, Miigwech. So thank you for today's sunrise, for the breath and life within us, the food, the water, and for all of the creations. Each day on Mother Earth, we welcome Grandfather Sun, Grandmother Moon, our sister stars, and brother planets. So we're thankful for the beauty and for all that has been given to us. And we're mindful never to take more than we need, and always give back more than we take. And so we present all these words today, or actually tonight, in gratitude to the sun, the moon, the stars, and the planets, the earth and all her elements that give us life, for all the peoples of the world, like those gathered here today, or tonight, I should say. Last week, we celebrated Water Day, and we signify that we're working together to honor the water and to speak to healthy rivers, lakes, oceans for generations to come. So for all of this, we say Miigwech, Miigwech, Kichi Miigwech. Thank you.
Thanks, Fred. So before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping, just for everyone to know, this meeting is being recorded, and the recording will be posted on Waterfront Toronto's YouTube channel in the coming weeks. As I mentioned, there will be a Q&A at the end of this session. We're going to ask, since there are quite a lot of people registered for this meeting, that everyone use the chat function to put your questions and comments in. You can do that at any time. The Q&A will be at the end of the presentation, but feel free to put your questions and your comments in throughout the meeting. I cannot see the chat because I'm sharing my screen, but my colleague Michaela is monitoring the chat, and she can not only answer a couple of your questions and make note of your comments, but she'll also take questions and share them with me as the moderator so that I can ask them to our staff during the Q&A. If you don't see your exact wording or your exact question, it may be that we've amalgamated very similar questions just to make sure that we get to everyone's questions and we don't run out of time. If we don't get to all the questions, we will be publishing a fulsome summary of this meeting that will include answers to any and all questions, and will also capture any comments that are made. If you're calling in by phone to this meeting, you don't have access to the chat. In that case, if you have a question or a comment, you can email it to us, and you can see the email there on the screen, or you can also call or text us at any time. That's the phone number to the Waterfront Toronto Communications Info line. So we'll be able to get that information and follow up with you. Before moving on, our project team would like to acknowledge that the land upon which we're undertaking our revitalization efforts is part of the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people today. This area is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. And we chose this photo, the photo on this slide, for a particular reason. I know that Fred will speak later on in the presentation to why the waterfront and Lake Ontario is especially significant to Indigenous peoples. So I'll just say that this photo shows the recently inundated new mouth of the Don River in the Portlands, which is what creates the island that we're talking about this evening. The significance of this is pretty profound, and soon, not quite yet, but soon, the water at the mouth of the Don is going to once again flow freely into Lake Ontario. So I wanted to show this image just to kind of give a sense of this particular location and this project's significance. So what we're doing here tonight is a report back. Last year, we came out to the public to engage on a density study for the future community on what's tentatively called Villiers Island. This is going to inform proposed updates to the 2017 Villiers Island Precinct Plan, with the goal of increasing density on public lands to add more housing, including, importantly, a target of 30% affordable rental units, not unites. Sharing information about the next steps is also one of the goals of this meeting. Tonight is a report back, but we want to make sure that we're being clear about future opportunities and focus of what some of those future public engagements might look like. I would like now to invite Councillor Paula Fletcher, Ward 14 City Councillor, to come up and make a few welcoming remarks. We really appreciate her joining us at the meeting tonight, and her joining us at all of the meetings that we've held over the many past years as we've moved this project forward. She is pictured here on a recent site visit to that same location that we showed earlier on the slide, just after we started inundation in the river valley. And this was especially meaningful because the councillor has been working so tirelessly over the years to make sure that the waterfront revitalization happens and that it happens right. And of course, her advocacy work around affordable housing on this new community is one of the major reasons that we're moving forward with this work that we're reporting back on tonight. So without further ado, if you wouldn't mind, Councillor Fletcher, giving us some welcoming remarks to start our meeting off.
Thank you so much, Mira. And you've noted how many people are interested in this project. It's just fantastic to have hundreds and hundreds of people. And I'm so excited to share this meeting with you tonight and to spend time with you all, the staff and all of the residents here, to look at the options to increase the density on Villiers Island, which will allow for more affordable housing to be built on this beautiful new island that's being created through the naturalization of the mouth of the Don. And I know how important affordable housing is to all of us. And I've been so happy with the response of the city and Waterfront Toronto, the many pushes to increase this density in order to accommodate a 30% target of affordable housing, not just a 20% target of affordable housing, to make sure that the waterfront is indeed a place where everybody can live here, and it is a waterfront, truly a waterfront for all. And all incomes, all people, everybody can live on the waterfront. So much of this land on Villiers Island is city-owned land, and we have a very aggressive housing policy of 30%. So it only seemed right that, particularly on these lands, that we reach that target of 30%, which means we have to readjust the density. So I think tonight is truly a landmark night and a landmark moment, and I'm really happy to share it with all of you. And although the meeting is actually called the Villiers Island Density Study, I really am getting myself ready for a name change that will reflect the city's Indigenous Truth and Reconciliation Plan and our commitment to reconciliation with the Indigenous communities in Toronto and around Toronto. And you'll hear more about this exciting opportunity in the presentation. I hope you'll agree that that will be another landmark moment when the island would get a new name reflecting the incredibly important Indigenous history, culture, and placemaking with this naturalization of the mouth of the Don. So thanks very much, Mira. I'm really looking forward to all the pieces here tonight that you're going to showing us.
Thanks, Councillor, and thanks again for being here. So I'd like to now ask Sarah to start us off and speak a little bit more to the opportunity that we have here for this island. Oops.
Hi, everyone. So the planning for this place began in the 1980s, starting with an exciting vision to renaturalize the waterfront. This island was created as part of that vision by the extension of the Don River. Renaturalization of the river and the restoration of the original ecosystems is happening now as part of the Portland's Flood Protection Project. It's an 8-year construction project, one of the biggest in Canada, that protects 240 hectares of land from flooding. We're doing this by extending the Don River south from the Keating Channel, west through the Portlands and into Toronto's Inner Harbour. On the visual that you're looking at, you're looking south from Lakeshore Boulevard over the Keating Channel, and you can see where the new river will flow and where new bridges at Cherry and Commissioner Street will cross it. Next slide. This is a once in a generation opportunity. This will deliver Canada's first climate positive neighborhood through a strategy of net zero carbon buildings, solar PV energy storage, deep geothermal and district energy. It will drive new economic growth in the climate action, clean tech, health and well-being and creative industries, and maximize the value of Villiers as a tourism asset for Toronto and Canada by creating a regional destination. It will create a community that is truly affordable and accessible to all, including the opportunity of exploring new models to provide more affordable housing. It will produce a nationally significant network of parks and public realm to draw people from across the city and region to the water's edge. Next slide. There are multiple connections between land and water that we can see here, with a fine-grained street network that will support transit, walking, cycling to and within the island, with links to the city mainland to the north and the Portlands to the east and the south. The city, in partnership with the TTC and Waterfront Toronto, are advancing the design for the full Waterfront East Light Rail Transit project from Queens Quay to Villiers Loop, which would connect the island to Union Station and to the Ontario Line Corktown Station, an existing King Street station via the extension of the 504A streetcar line. The island will be surrounded by natural environment, becoming an extension of the Central Waterfront and the Don Valley Trail system. I'll pass it along now to Scott.
Thanks very much, Sarah. So just to introduce myself, I'm Scott Pennington. I'm a VP at CreateTO, responsible for our Portlands business. And for those that aren't aware, CreateTO is the city's strategic real estate agency and the owner of the majority of the lands in the Portlands, as well as the precinct that we're talking to you about tonight. We are a proud partner working with Waterfront Toronto and the city in advancing this plan. So today I'm here to talk to you about the importance that City Council, and in particular Councillor Fletcher, have placed on affordable housing in Villiers Island and the steps that we're taking as a project team, WT, CreateTO, and the city to ensure that that vision is realized. Mary, you can advance the next slide. So we all know the fact that we're facing a crisis of affordability in Toronto, and we all have a responsibility to be a part of the solution. Council's Housing Action Plan and the council directions that have followed from it have set firm targets for advancing the construction of at least 285,000 new homes within the next 10 years to address the supply crunch in our city. This fall, council also approved new targets for affordable housing, increasing from 40,000 to 65,000 the number of rent-controlled homes that we want to see approved and in the pipeline by 2030. And that includes 41,000 affordable rental homes, 6,500 rent geared to income or RGI homes, and a further 17,500 rent-controlled homes. There is a huge opportunity for us to contribute to these objectives through the Precinct Plan at Villiers Island. Here, you can advance to the next slide. As was mentioned earlier, a plan was adopted for Villiers Island back in 2017. That plan at the time contemplated just under or just around 48,000 or 4,800, sorry, total units, approximately 850 of which would have been affordable. Almost from the start, though, there was a recognition that the affordable target of 20% and the total number of units here was not ambitious enough, and that in order to, there was a need to make a meaningful impact on our housing supply constraints. We would need to reevaluate the opportunity to increase the number of affordable or total number of units, to total number of homes, as well as the number of affordable homes on the island, and do so in a thoughtful and sensitive manner. That's what we're here to talk to you about tonight, and to show you how we anticipate being able to increase by roughly 3 times the number of affordable units that we're going to be able to achieve on the island by the time this project is completed. Next slide. But before we get into the details on that, I really want to echo Mira's comments and acknowledge the advancements that you're going to see on the plan tonight would not be possible without the leadership of Councillor Fletcher, both as a member of council and as the mayor's designate on the CreateTO board. Between 2017 and 2023, I count no fewer than 4 formal motions that were adopted at her initiative, not to mention the tireless effort behind the scenes to really push staff, but also council to adopt more aggressive and ambitious targets for affordable housing on the island. This culminated with a council resolution to increase the target from 20 to 30% affordable housing on public lands, and to ensure that this is truly a mixed use or mixed community, incorporating co-op housing, RGI units, senior and mid-range rental housing. As the councillor has said, everyone should have a chance to live in our new waterfront that we're building here in the Portlands. Next slide. And Villiers Island really does present a unique opportunity for us to address our housing needs. This is not a privately owned district. There is privately owned land, but the majority of it is under public ownership. The vast majority of that, of which is under control by the City of Toronto through CreateTO. But there's also some federally owned land in Waterfront Toronto as well. So this presents a really unique opportunity, and it means we will not just simply be requesting that our partners build affordable housing into their concepts or into their plans. It means that we're going to be insisting that our policy objectives for affordable housing are built into the program from the very start. And you'll expect to see that in the plans that we come forward with for the public lands. Next slide. So to summarize, we now have clear direction and goals for achieving affordable housing on the island. This will be updated in this will be reflected, in the updated precinct plan that's being discussed tonight. But as importantly, it's going to be a central component of the business and implementation plan that will be brought forward to guide development of the public lands within the next year. First, we're developing a plan to maximize the opportunity for housing on the island and working to ensure that 30% of the units on public lands are affordable. Second, we're pursuing a balance of different types of housing, including ownership and rental units with a range of affordability levels, including deeply affordable units. We'll be looking to build life cycle housing as well, including housing serving families and seniors. And as we do this, we will ensure that Villiers Island is planned and built out as a complete community with access to a range of facilities and services. Third, we want to ensure that new development is enabled through innovative partnerships with the private, nonprofit, and cooperative housing sectors. And as we do this, we will have a particular focus on Indigenous-led housing and other organizations serving equity-seeking groups to ensure they can meaningfully engage in the process. And we will, of course, reiterate the importance of having all partners, federal, provincial, municipal, at the table to realize this vision. Thanks, and with that, I'll pass it over to Fred.
Thank you, Scott. So in order to talk about the support for a renewed vision for waterfront revitalization, we need to zoom out to consider the entire waterfront, which spans from Etobicoke Creek to the Rouge River. In 2022, Council approved a renewed vision for the next phase of waterfront revitalization, and this included a lot of what we're talking to you tonight about the Eastern Waterfront. Villiers Island is one of the projects that will advance and update goals that you see in this slide. So Scott has presented these projects that but that they're not just focused on housing. Indigenous placemaking and placekeeping is integral to truth, justice, and reconciliation in that it creates and nurtures space in process and policy for ceremony, teaching, and community, strengthens Indigenous connections with lands and waters, and builds cultural competency and capacity for land-based Indigenous engagement. The outcomes of placemaking and placekeeping initiatives are varied and are all critical for the health and well-being of Indigenous peoples. Many of the projects across the waterfront focus on green space, sustainability, recreational uses, including access to water. Next slide, please. So if we center on water and waterfront revitalization, we ask ourselves, why is the waterfront and Lake Ontario in particular, and the projects involving these areas, why are they especially significant to Indigenous peoples? This quote by Grandmother Pauline Short, if you don't know Grandmother Pauline Short, you should. But so for thousands of years, Indigenous nations have gathered along the shores of Ngani Gichigaming, or Leading Lake, and netted and fished from her waters, building homes and communities, and lived in a reciprocal way, always being mindful, respectful to the lake and her inhabitants. Keeping this in mind, as we move forward together in the protection and sustainability of the lake and all that call her home, it is important to reach back to the original relationship between Indigenous peoples and the lake. Our worldview is clear and focused as we see all life as part of the sacred hoop that honors all creation. Every living thing plays a vital role in life, no less than a greater than there is balance. So from the input that we hear from this came out of a water ceremony that had us meet with Indigenous youth at the waterfront, speaking with them to share their viewpoints on water. And from this feedback, we get that they tell us that they want more opportunities to live, work, and play in Toronto, especially on the waterfront, and bringing folks, Indigenous folks, into the process that require environmental assessments and revitalization projects, development projects. In particular, you have the Mississaugas of the Credit, who have a broader vision to tie themselves into projects and neighboring areas, exploring how they connect and identify ways to connect to the their core essence, who they are, into the land and areas, and connect them back to the land and water. Should be not lost on anyone that the name of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation affiliates them with their proximity to water, and really speaks of that displacement and eventual process where we can have that responsibility to really bring them closer to that water on their treaty lands. Next slide, please. So building off of the renaturalization and restoration of the mouth of the Don River, the redevelopment of the Portlands offers a unique moment to support Indigenous cultural revitalization on the waterfront, integrating Indigenous knowledge systems, oral histories, protocols, and connections to the land into the process of waterfront revitalization and reconciliation. As you can see through discussions about the future of the waterfront with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis, including urban Indigenous communities, there is a desire for this cultural revitalization and representation, placekeeping and art, affordable housing as referenced, space for ceremony, access to the water and nature, economic and business opportunities, and return of land and stewardship. Next slide, please. Many Indigenous placekeeping and cultural revitalization initiatives are being advanced by the city, Waterfront TO, and CreateTO, including park features and landscape design, paintings and stewardship, public art and interpretive signage, planning and design studies, and infrastructure design. A culturally informed framework that coordinates, communicates, and informs the many actions in the Portlands that can support the Reconciliation Action Plan, including placekeeping initiatives that would have permanent Indigenous name for the island by the fall of 2024. This will be done through an Indigenous advisory circle and Indigenous engagement, followed by public engagement and a final recommendation to the City Council. In referencing the city's Reconciliation Action Plan, we have the opportunity to acknowledge the systemic barrier of Indigenous languages through residential schools and other assimilation policies, and the need to support language revitalization efforts for Indigenous children, youth, and adults. Next slide, please. All of this stems from the question, so where is the Indigenous history and ongoing presence recognized and visible on the waterfront? Now famous walk by Elder Dr. Duke Redbird, and if you don't know who he is, you should, posited the following comment. Since 1805, from the Don River to the Humber River, there has been no evidence that Indigenous peoples ever lived on the waterfront of Toronto. One of Elder Redbird's solutions was the Wigwam Chichimang, which is a project that provides an opportunity for Torontonians and visitors to learn about the Indigenous culture and history of Toronto. These, like many others, can provide future opportunities for the city to collaborate with Indigenous communities and their leadership for a number of projects, including truth, justice, and reconciliation, including through Indigenous engagement, affordable rental housing, and economic development initiatives, and return of land and stewardship rights. And we also need to express the importance of water to Indigenous communities, which is reflective from what we've heard in past engagements, as well as the wise words of Indigenous elders and knowledge providers like Grandmother Pauline and Elder Dr. Duke Redbird. Thank you. So I'm going to pass it on to Mira.
Thanks, Fred. So I'm going to ask Anthony to pick it up
Sorry.
from here. No, that's okay.
Thank you, Fred.
There are a lot of us presenting tonight.
Thank you, Fred. And I'm just going to quickly talk about the planning process that brought us here tonight. And the 2017 Villiers Island Precinct Plan had a very ambitious vision for a compact, complete, connected community that embraced inclusivity and was attempting to become the first carbon, either carbon positive slash, excuse me, I'm getting over a cold, climate positive community in Canada. And that a very, very ambitious vision, as well as the principles that guided planning back when we were developing the 2017 Precinct Plan, have informed how we've moved forward with this Villiers Island Precinct Plan process through that massing update exercise that we've been undertaking since 2023. And we have a number of proposed changes to the 2017 Precinct Plan that allow us to increase housing and advance our very aggressive affordable housing target of 30%. And that will be implemented through a zoning bylaw amendment, as well as amendments to the Central Waterfront Secondary Plan and Portland's area-specific policies. And that is planned to be brought forward close to the end of Q2 2024 to the Planning and Housing Committee at the City of Toronto. We're also moving forward with further Indigenous engagement, as has been discussed earlier, which also will result in a renaming of the island, and completing our phasing implementation plans, as well as public realm design updates over the next 12 months. Next slide. So what we presented to the public in June 2023 was a number of approaches in the attempt to increase density on Villiers Island while maintaining that very robust foundation. And we looked at an approach to increase density focused on Keating Channel and the northern blocks on Villiers Island. A second approach looked at increasing density on the western blocks, centered around the primary transit hub, as well as a third approach which increased density just focused on the center of the island. And that had an increase of between 40 and 60% over the 2017 plan's density calculations. Next slide. And as part of that June 2023, the 2023 public meeting, as well as the survey that followed, there was a number of top priorities that were identified. Maximizing affordable housing was absolutely considered critical as a top priority, as well as ensuring we activate the public realm. Community amenities and transportation infrastructure to support that increased density was identified through that exercise, and a number of very specific input on built form approach was brought forward. There was preferred locations for towers that were central, western, and in the northern blocks, and also looking at prioritizing animated public spaces and putting towers near transit stops. And this input informed the final solution that we're bringing forward tonight for increasing density on the island to approximately 60%. Next slide. And as part of our due diligence work, we explored the impacts of infrastructure and servicing on to support this increased density, and it was determined there are planned and existing municipal services have adequate capacity for the projected populations. And we're currently advancing design and construction for the Portland sewage pumping station, as well as detailed designs for commissioners' street sanitary sewer, which will support the development of the Portlands in its entirety, but are absolutely critical to unlock development potential within Villiers Island. Next slide. And we also explored the impacts of increased density on our transportation network. And we concluded that at full build out, increased densities can be accommodated with the planned transit network as well as the transportation network. But the Waterfront East LRT transit is absolutely key to fully unlocking the island. We are promoting active transportation. It is absolutely critical in this island to have that active transportation focus. And there is a great deal of infrastructure that has currently been developed and additional infrastructure that is planned that will support walking and cycling on the island, as well as to the remainder of the Portlands, and connecting also to the downtown. Next slide. And we've explored the community facilities and services that would be required to support the increased population. So we've updated our 2015 community facilities and services recommendations, which would require a larger community center, a larger elementary school, and an additional daycare facility, but also the inclusion of a new neighborhood library. We've also looked actually at our parks capacity, and Villiers Island is unique in Toronto in having a very generous park system that support not just Villiers Island, but the remainder of the Portlands, as well as being a regional destination. And it's been identified that the parkland that we have planned and much of which has been under construction currently can serve both the regional as local and local community needs. Next slide. And I will hand this over to Ray.
Thanks, Anthony. I'll speak to the proposed updates to the precinct plan. So on the left there, you'll see our updated model based on our proposed changes to the 2017 precinct plan. This is a summary of the key changes, some of which Anthony has just touched on, resulting from the density study. As you've heard already, changes include updating the affordable housing target to deliver a target of 30% of units on public land as affordable housing, Through this density study, we found that we could increase the residential gross floor area by GFA by 60% over the approved 2017 plan. This will maximize housing opportunities by first increasing the locations and numbers and heights of the towers. Secondly, increasing the maximum heights of the base and mid-rise buildings. And lastly, introducing residential towers to blocks that were previously planned for lower or mid-rise buildings. As Anthony mentioned, the project team will be updating the infrastructure and servicing approach for the island to make sure it can support the added residents. Next slide, Mira. So as a reminder, the 3 approaches we showed last year that Anthony showed you earlier, those were approaches to increasing density that weren't mutually exclusive. And through a density study, we took elements from each onto our final approach. To that end, the resulting demonstration plan that you see on the right, which we call the 2024 demonstration plan, is a mix of these approaches. Here's how our proposed update looks when compared to the 2017 plan side by side. Again, we call this a demonstration plan because really it's a guide for future application and doesn't necessarily reflect exactly what the future buildings will look like. You see in this comparison where the major changes are proposed. Overall, the floor space has increased across the island. We're not changing the development blocks, but the total amount of usable floor area within the blocks is generally more. And this is possible by locating the towers or the taller elements, which are focused on the western and central area of the island, with some lower towers along the Keating Channel Promenade, and the tallest towers being concentrated along the New Cherry Gateway and the streetcar corridor. The heights of the base buildings is 6 to 10 stories, which is the same as before in the 2017 precinct plan, but now more on the higher end. Next slide, Mira. These are the estimates based on the increased GFA. The numbers, again, we're showing today are still estimates based on the proposed changes to the built form. Approximately, there will be 800,000 square meters of GFA island-wide, which translates to approximately 8,500 to 9,000 new residential units island-wide. What we're showing is the amount of affordable rental housing possible on public lands. And as a reminder, that is about 80% of the island that you see on the plan there. There's also a minimum 10% non-residential uses. The potential amount of affordable rental units is as many as 2,700 at the moment, again, based on the increased GFA and a target of 30% affordable rental on the public lands. But again, this remains as an estimate as we don't know the details such as what the unit sizes will be. Next slide. This shows the distribution of the tower location and its heights on the public lands. As I mentioned, the tall towers are concentrated on the western side of the island with a height peak along the New Cherry streetcar corridor stop, and these are shown in the bluer tones to the left. There are moderate to shorter towers along the Keating Channel Promenade and along the eastern part of the island, shown in the yellow tones. So even though we increased density and heights across the island, including the heights of the base buildings, we made efforts to ensure the key public spaces will have sufficient sunlight as well, maintain the scale of the streets that will have heritage buildings such as Old Cherry Street. Next slide. So the new Villiers Island is a result of the Portland's flood protection project to renaturalize the mouth of the Don River. This is an important connection to the ecological corridor that runs through the whole city. The island will be surrounded by natural environments, becoming an extension of the central waterfront and the Don Valley Trail system. And the island will have a significant parkland to serve both regional and local community needs. During the consultation through the environmental assessment and the detailed design of the Portland's flood protection project, plus the Waterfront Next, we heard from thousands of people at hundreds of meetings and workshops, and we heard repeatedly the importance of preserving and expanding green space and habitat for wildlife, as well as balancing public access and naturalized quiet spaces. And the updates to this precinct plan still support this. Next slide. So the PLFP design responds to the past feedback. The opening of the PLFP parks will be in 2025. And while the PLFP is complete along the river valley and the parks along it, there's much more work to be done in the remaining public realm that is highlighted here in pink, including the remaining parks, the water's edge, as well as the internal streets. So when we start the process of designing the remaining public realm, we will again collect input from the people who use the spaces. Next slide. So as the public realm plan gets underway, again, there'll be more opportunities for the public to provide input on these additional parks and street designs. And as you can see here, conceptualized public spaces like squares and promenades are some of the types of squares we're imagining to create a vibrant and active new community on Villiers Island. So with that, I'd like to hand it over back to Mira. Thanks.
Thanks, Ray, and thanks everyone for your presentations. We wanted to take a moment, as I mentioned at the top of the meeting, to touch base now about opportunities that we've identified as a team for future engagement. These are areas that, as you've heard throughout this evening's presentation, we're going to be continuing to work on over the future months, years, as this plan develops out. So what we'd love to take a minute or two to do right now with everyone who's been leaving amazing questions and comments, which we're about to get to, is pull up a survey. We'll provide the link in the chat for the meeting. You can also scan the QR code that you see up on the screen here right now. And just let us know if there is one of these topics, these areas that you're interested in getting engaged with us on. And we'll add you to that growing network of people with specific lived experiences that can be applied to helping to make the best projects that we possibly can as a project team. So the poll, I should mention, will not be open indefinitely, but it will be open until April 2nd. So you can take a look at it on your own time later if you don't want to fill it out right now, or you can go ahead and fill it out right now. We'll pause for a moment for those who are interested in doing that. And while those of you who are interested are taking a look and opening it up, it's just a very straightforward Google form. I will just note that we did not talk during this presentation about this last bullet here, early uses on the island. These would be ways that we're thinking about activating the island in the earlier years once the parks and river that are being delivered through the Portland's Flood Protection Project are open. And so there may be some conversations that you'd like to participate in around where, when, and how that can happen. So I will be silent and just give everyone just a minute, and then we'll move into the Q&A because I know people have a lot of good questions that they want to get answered.
Oh, and for everyone that's on this particular meeting, there is a question within the survey about allowing the counselor access to your email. So please consider that as well as you're reviewing the survey. Thank you.
Yeah, you'll see that at the bottom of the survey before you exit. So make sure you scroll all the way. Right. There's no barring anyone from continuing to fill out that form, but I think I will go ahead and move into the questions and answers. And I'm actually going to stop presenting because we don't need the slides up while we're answering questions. If we do, I'll pull them back up. So the way this works, as I mentioned, it may have been before some of you joined, so I'll repeat myself a little bit, is I am not looking in the meeting chat. Our team members have been in the meeting chat and have been amalgamating questions so that I can ask as many of the questions as possible. So if you don't hear the exact wording of your question, it may be that they've consolidated it with a very similar question so that we can get through. I see we have many. I'm scrolling up through the questions that they've been queuing up for me. If there's a question that you posted that doesn't get answered, you will for sure see an answer from us in the meeting summary that we're going to circulate to everyone who's joined this meeting and will also be posted on our websites and through our social media platforms. If there was a comment that you left, we're going to leave it as just a comment for now, and we will incorporate that into the meeting summary. Again, due to the nature of the virtual meeting, it can be a little bit difficult to just read out the comments. And I'll actually take that quick segue just to mention that there is another meeting, same report back, same material, similar project team that we're planning in person for May 2nd, and there'll be more information available about that. So if you did want to have more back and forth chat, I know it can be difficult in this virtual format sometimes, just to kind of have a dialogue. There is that second opportunity to do so. And then, of course, always the opportunity to follow up on email, and the members of this team are available to respond in more detail. So with all that said, I'll go to the questions and I'll start going through them. I'll read them out, which I always find, this is why I love in-person meetings, because I don't like being the voice of everyone. I want you to be able to ask your questions. So we're going to do that on May 2nd for those who are able and interested to come out. So the first question comes from Eliza. And the question is, when we talk about affordable housing, what is the city's definition of affordable? And does this include geared to income housing? And I think we have Matthew Meslard from the city's housing secretariat, and if not, Scott could probably address that as well. Or another member of our team.
I'm happy to jump in, Mira.
Go for it, Councillor. You know the answer.
Yeah, the technical definition is based on CMHC, which is the Canada Mortgage and Housing Company, at 80% of market value in that area. But as you'll see from the motions, it's very clear that this should be not just the 80% model, but also have rent geared to income. And in a sliding scale, recently, a lot of the housing that's designated in different sites to be affordable also has a 60, 40, 80% of CMHC numbers. So it should be quite a mixed area, not just at the 80%. I hope that answers that question.
Thank you, Councillor. Much appreciated. To our next question, which comes from Ankush, says, hi, it's great to see a net carbon zero program. Is this a net zero by operation or design? Is this focused on balancing any operating costs and offsets any taxpayers' costs? I think what I will do is ask Aaron Barter. Hey, Aaron, I can see you turned your camera on. Aaron's in our innovation and sustainability team at Waterfront Toronto. Can answer this.
Yeah, thanks, Mira. Can you hear me? Yep. Ankush, thanks for the question. So a couple things, I'll be brief, but in short, design, buildings on Villiers will be designed to demonstrate net zero with an annual greenhouse gas intensity of 0 using whole building energy modeling, which is the Toronto Green Standard framework that's been in place now for a few years. In addition to that, there will be other sustainability requirements placed on the buildings that are developed on public lands, including a limitation on embodied carbon, which we're pretty excited about, which has been informed by recent work at the City of Toronto. So both operational and embodied carbon will have strict requirements.
Thanks, Aaron. And I should just say that Matthew would love to answer, but there's some mic issues, and that's why there was a long silence there. So we'll work on that. Moving to the next question, the question from Amy is, which bridge design won the commission? And I'm assuming that, Amy, you're asking about the Keating Channel Pedestrian Bridge. I'm wondering if, Ray, you would give us a quick update on where that's at?
Sure,
No,
I believe.
I can
Oh.
probably give an answer to that.
Oh, Chris
Mira?
Glaser. Yes,
I
go
am
ahead.
in fact here.
Hi, Chris.
Hi, Mira. So we have not actually publicly announced the winner yet. That is something we are hoping to be able to do imminently, but for a variety of reasons that hasn't happened. But we do still expect to move forward with that project.
Thanks, Chris. Chris, our Chief Planning and Design Officer with Waterfront Toronto. Thanks for joining us this evening. This is the other disadvantage of virtual, right? Can't always see who's here. So moving to our next question. Matt asks, is there a longer term plan to connect the Villiers Loop to the Ontario Line's East Harbour Station? Who's best positioned to answer this? Anthony? Jed?
I can answer it unless my colleague Nigel is
Oh, Nigel.
on this call.
Nigel was unable to make it this evening.
Okay. Yes, the plan is to eventually connect the loop with Ontario Line and actually bring the LRT all the way up to Queen Street, and that is a longer term ambition. That was identified during the Portlands and South of Eastern Transportation Servicing Master Plan, and the work is advancing on the first phase of the Broadview extension through East Harbour currently, and there will be further work in the future about continuing to advance the design to bring Broadview down to Commissioner Street, which is essential actually for making that connection. But the exact timing, unfortunately, I can't provide, and I was hoping my colleague within transportation planning could provide further information because he's much more intimately involved than I am.
No worries, Anthony. And there's always an opportunity to add a post-meeting note, which we can and will do in the Q's and A's if we get more information. So I'm going to move on to the next question, which is from Kate. And Kate asks, how will you be ensuring affordability is maintained while developing a net zero community? I'll ask Aaron to come back and tackle that. And I will start by saying, I think we're going to assume, Kate, that your concern is that developing a net zero community is costly. If we misinterpreted that, go ahead and let us know in the chat, and Michaela can flag that for us. But go ahead, Aaron.
So in very, briefly, yes, very much so. Focus on affordability across the board, including as we think about our plans for sustainability and net zero. At a high level, I'll just touch on 2 points, which is that buildings on Villiers Island will have very high levels of energy efficiency, again, based on the Toronto Green Standard framework. And so, in other words, saving money through improved insulation, improved window performance, etc. So we anticipate that will have a good affordability benefits to residents. And then secondly, we anticipate that there would be shared central heating and cooling services. I think there's other questions in the chat about district energy that we'll get to in a moment, which across the thousands of units planned for Villiers Island, we anticipate can reduce mechanical costs for those buildings and further drive down costs to consumers. So very much our intention is to have affordable and also achieving all of our net zero goals.
Thanks. And I know that's a tough one, Aaron, to sort of answer succinctly. That's probably a deep dive, but it's a good start at answering the question, I hope. And the next one I think is going to be for you also, so stick around. The question comes from Richard, who asks, curious to know if district heating and cooling will be a requirement of the city controlled development.
Yeah, in fact, I might lump that in with the next one as well. But yeah, thanks, Richard. Great question. And again, the answer in short is yes. We expect that development on publicly owned lands would connect to a low carbon thermal energy network or district energy. Details on that would be refined as the district energy system and the buildings themselves advance through the design. I will note that the City of Toronto has a joint development agreement with Enwave Energy Corporation, which includes a node for Villiers Island. And so I'll just, Mira, take the liberty of answering Jordan's question, which is very similar, right below it in the chat.
Yeah, go ahead.
Jordan asked, are there any details about the planned district energy you can share? And I'll say, thanks, Jordan. Technical details not yet defined, but I'll share some high-level points. As I noted, there's an existing relationship for this area under the joint development agreement that the city and Enwave have. And there's some options, some exciting options, I think, under consideration by the city and Enwave, including geothermal and geo-exchange systems. There's also an interesting opportunity to connect Villiers Island back into the central district energy system in Toronto, which could present an opportunity to share low carbon energy when there's an excess back with the rest of the city. So all of these ideas would be subject to more design and cost benefit analyses by the city and Enwave, but we're encouraged and excited for what could come on Villiers Island.
Thanks, Aaron. The next question comes from Irene, who asks, will the privately owned buildings be subject to an affordable housing percentage? I think, Anthony, you could probably tackle that, or even Jed Kilburn, who is on this call. He's on our development planning team at Waterfront Toronto.
I'm happy to hop in. Hi.
Sure. Hi, Jed.
So the target of 30% affordable is for the publicly owned lands, but as part of the development application for the private landowner, Waterfront Toronto and the City of Toronto were working with the developer to secure as much affordable housing as possible so that we have kind of a net impact of a greater percentage of affordable housing.
Yes,
Thanks,
and
go ahead, Anthony.
And we're engaged in Ontario Land Tribunal discussions with the private landowner, including about affordable housing, and that's been included in the solicitor's request for council's further directions that was brought to council last week.
Great, thank you both. This is potentially one for you, Anthony, and I know you're protecting your voice, so I feel bad calling on you. But the question comes from Christopher, and it's how will private landowners with historical businesses in the area be protected? And presumably he means the broader Portlands, not just the Villiers or future Island to be named project area.
Mm-hmm. So the Portlands was planned to be a diverse number of employment-focused districts and emerging new mixed-use residential communities. And Villiers Island is the first of those emerging communities. We do have a number of districts which are focused on employment, and those include our production, interactive, and creative use districts, such as Media City, which is home to Pinewood Studios, as well as Piccore, which is soon to be home to an emerging film studio, which we're calling Basin Media Hub. And then we also have a number of other districts, including Warehouse District, which is focused on some of our production, active, and creative uses, but also some of our lighter industrial, and then many of our city servicing or port-oriented uses that are further to the south of the ship channel, as well as to the east, much closer to Ashbridges Bay. So it's meant to be a working port and an employment area, as well as welcoming a number of new residents to this really unique area.
Thanks, Anthony. So moving to the next question, Sarah asks, are there any plans related to boats? I would like to see a small craft storage for the public, similar to the one in the beaches, but one that has rentals and special equipment for accessibility. And I know we have Danny Brown with the city's Parks, Forestry, and Recreation department here. Maybe you could answer that one.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. Danny Brown from Parks, Forestry and Recreation. Happy to report there will be multiple opportunities to access the water using watercraft, both canoes, kayaks, and stand-up paddleboards. Staff are currently working on opportunities for rentals, storage, and other opportunities to let the public access watercraft in the new Don River and the park system. So more information to come, so stay tuned.
Thanks. Nice to be the bearer of good news. I will ask the next question on behalf of Andrew, who says, can you give a broad outline of the schedule for realization, timing and format of release of RFPs? When does the industry need to gear up? For those who don't know what an RFP is, he's talking about requests for proposals. Maybe Aaron, you want to quickly come back and speak to that?
Sure. So good question. So there's lots of hard work underway right now at the city, at CreateTO and Waterfront Toronto. We don't have a, in terms, the RFP timelines haven't yet been set out, but I'll give you a quick high-level timeline. So we're anticipating that homes on Villiers Island could be occupied in 2031. So you can, working back from that, there would be work underway on designing and constructing enabling infrastructure, so the streets, pipes, parks, etc. Engaging developers to work on these sites for both affordable and market housing, and then ultimately constructing those new buildings and constructing the new community facilities. So there's going to be a lot of work underway over the next 5, 6, 7 years as we get started on Villiers Island, and it will then, of course, continue well out into the future. So I hope that answers your question at a high level.
Thanks, Aaron. The next question is from Carol, and she wants to know how we might address the concern that the island seems so isolated from the rest of the city. How do we prevent it from feeling like it's isolated? I think that, Anthony is probably going to want to speak to that. You haven't thought about this at all, right, Anthony?
No, and this is a great question. And so Villiers Island, though, it is the first emerging mixed-use residential community within the Portlands. It's actually part of a much broader revitalization program across the central waterfront. And as you've seen, development has been proceeding to the east, and currently East Bayfront is reaching its full build-out potential, and we have been seeing also quite close to Villiers Island the rapid advancement of development within excuse me, within the West Don lands. And development will actually, there will be 2 new emerging communities that are going to be directly adjacent to the north of Villiers Island. That's Keating Channel East and Keating Channel West. There is also the Quayside development, which will be connected to Villiers Island through a pedestrian bridge. And then we're going to have the emerging communities directly adjacent within the Portlands, which is going to be Cleary District directly to the east and directly to the south in the future, 2 emerging mixed-use communities, which we call South River and Polson Key. So though it appears isolated currently in the fulsome nature of time, it is going to be part of a much broader collection of communities. And the way I see it is actually becoming, in many ways, one very large community. And Jed, do you have anything to add?
I think the only other thing that I would add, Anthony, is that there are going to be great connections to like pedestrian priority connections, as well as good transit and good connectivity through and within the island. So I think that the island itself will function as a complete community, in addition to being connected to all of the other neighborhoods that are currently both under construction now on the western part of the waterfront, as well as the future developments in the east.
And if I could add one more thing about Villiers Island, and what's really unique about it is the proximity from the main side of the waterfront. Even though it's an island, the Keating Channel is actually only about 36 meters, the actual waterway. So it is actually much closer than what people might think the island is. And 36 meters is about the same space as Queen's Quay. So if you can imagine the development to the north in the future, and then right away across a lot of bridges, there will be Villiers Island. So I just wanted to point that physical proximity as well.
Thanks, everyone. I also think this is probably another, conversation that could be had in depth. So I'm sure there are other questions that flow from those answers that were provided. And this format doesn't always lend itself to that. But as I said, feel free to follow up by email or add a follow up in the chat right now. And that's going to be captured if we don't get to it through all the other questions. And we'll make sure that we give out as much information as we can to, continue to address these questions. These are good questions. So the next question is from Irene. She asks, has the city begun the process of expropriation of existing buildings? Scott, you could probably answer that, or Anthony also. Assuming that we're talking about Villiers Island, given that that's what the focus of this meeting is.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say to our earlier discussion, 80% of the developable land on Villiers Island is under public ownership already. That's not land that needs to be acquired. It's either owned by the city, the Port Authority, or Waterfront Toronto. At this point, there's been no direction by council to pursue acquisition of any additional lands.
Thanks. The next question comes from Lee, and it's a question about the total cost to governments collectively of this project. And maybe Aaron, you could tackle that one.
Sure. So beyond the investments that have been made in Portland's flood protection to create the island as we have it today, there will be considerable additional public investments required to service the lands, provide the parks and community facilities that have been described tonight. So it would include in that construction of a new light rail line, the Waterfront East LRT, the enabling infrastructure on Villiers Island, so streets and pipes and more, the affordable housing, as we've talked about this evening, the parks and public realm, so Villiers Park, Palmatory Park North, Keating Channel Promenade. So I don't have a number tonight, but multiple billions of dollars of public investment would be required, with, of course, massive benefit associated with it. So with the city and with CreateTO, we're refining our cost estimates at the moment, and we are engaging with the provincial and federal governments. We're also going to be working through a business and implementation plan with inputs from this study as discussed tonight, and then we'll work through how to best phase the project and roll out different parts of the project over the next few years. And that business and implementation plan would be brought forward for approval by City Council. So more to follow on this one, but a very good question.
And before I move on, is there anyone else on the team who wants to add anything? I thought that was a pretty comprehensive answer. All right, thanks, Aaron. A lot of work ahead of us for sure, and a lot of future engagements, as we've noted. Here's a question from Jerry about design considerations, asking what design considerations are in place to ensure that the mixture of affordable and market housing is such that a single unified community is created. Talk about a deep dive question. I wonder if Jed would want to address that, not to put you on the spot.
No, it's okay. And obviously any of my colleagues are welcome to jump in, but I think that one of the key things is that we still have the existing precinct plan, which sets out a really good framework for kind of a sense of cohesion on throughout the island with respect to the architecture of the buildings. I would also say that one of the things that we want to champion as well as an idea of design excellence. So making sure that each building can stand alone as a good architecturally sound building. And all of those component pieces will be put together so that there won't be a noticeable difference between affordable housing, market housing, any of the kinds of tenure that you would expect from any housing development. So I think that the whole will function as a unified whole rather than a sense of disparate pieces. So everything will come together both because of the planning framework, but also through urban design guidelines and the requirement that all of the buildings in Villiers Island, certainly on the publicly owned lands, would come to the Waterfront Toronto Design Review Panel, so that we're achieving architectural excellence throughout the island.
Thanks. Thank you, Jed. That's a good start to answering. I hope, Jerry, that starts to address your question. The next question is from Melissa, who starts by saying that will be such a special place. How will it be decided who gets to live there? How will individuals be selected for affordable housing? And how or when will individuals have the opportunity to buy or rent at market rates? So I think, Mathieu, if have your audio back, you can answer that. Hi.
Can you hear me? I have my audio. Oh, perfect. Yes. So apologies for earlier, everyone. I was trying to speak in the void. Mathieu Mallard, I'm the manager in the housing space at the city. So this is it's a great question. So just to give you a bit of so on the affordable housing, the city is establishing a centralized affordable rental housing access system. So by the time the affordable housing on Villiers Island is ready for occupancy, people will be able to essentially apply through this centralized system for affordable housing, not only on Villiers, but across the city. And then when the specific buildings on Villiers would become available, people through that centralized system and wait list would then be able to access the opportunity if they were eligible. And then in terms of the market portion of it, I think we've heard that starting in 2031, where a building would be ready for occupancy. So like that's the rental market, the market rental, sorry, would be available, and the opportunities to buy at Villiers, it would be a couple of years prior, I would assume.
Thanks, Mathieu, for answering that one. The next question is from Chad, who says, how about accessibility, disability? What is the percentage of units put aside for disability or accessible buildings? I wonder if Jed or Anthony has a start to an answer for that. It's early days, but.
I think very briefly, we don't have a target yet for the number of buildings that would be designated, or units that would be designated specifically to for accessibility. But I can say that the Ontario Building Code has guidelines for and requirements for accessible design. We're also, as we look at the design of the public realm, we're very aware of making sure that the public realm is fully accessible to everyone. I can say that Waterfront Toronto in our Quayside project has a target of 20% accessible units. And so I think as we move forward with development on Villiers Island, we would look to making sure that as many units as possible are accessible without yet having a specific target in mind.
Thanks, Jed. And again, if there's follow-up on this, we're happy to receive further emails and inquiries as we move forward. Sorry, was someone else trying to? Yes, go, Ray.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to Jed that Waterfront Toronto has published the Waterfront Accessibility Design Guideline in 2023, and this really speaks to the public realm, so the spaces in between the buildings and all the open space, to really provide consistent accessibility direction for new Waterfront Toronto public realm projects. So to help support the implementation of this guideline, we formed this accessibility advisory committee that would help us apply the principles and the requirements of the guidelines, as well as lived experience, and really help us advocate for accessible and inclusive public spaces. So I just wanted to mention the Waterfront Accessibility Design Guideline is also there.
Thanks, appreciate that. Okay. Michelle asks, will the affordable housing include residences specifically geared to elders? And I'm not sure if we're talking about seniors or elders from an Indigenous perspective. So not sure how to answer the question. Maybe you can clarify in the chat and we can come right back, Michelle, and answer that question in a moment. And then Matt asks, if we set aside soft restrictions like shading and aesthetics, are there hard infrastructure or buildability reasons to limit the density? Why build 5,000 units rather than 10,000? We aren't getting out of a housing crisis with modest, gentle development. This is a rare opportunity to build a neighborhood without any entrenched neighbors to fight against. I don't see a reason to limit the density at all. If a podium and tower works at 25 stories, the same podium can equally have a 50-story tower. So the crux of this question really is about, you know, how was what was the due diligence that was done as part of the density study to identify what was a reasonable amounts of density to add. Ray, maybe you want to start at that, and then I know there are lots of others who can also speak to this on the team.
Sorry, Mira, this is the question around the density overall buildings.
The question is around kind of how did we identify the limitations to the amount of density that's proposed to be added?
Yes, sorry. Yeah.
No, that's all right.
No, that's a great question. So I spoke to where we increased the density. So overall, from the 2017 precinct plan to our 2024 plan, and increasing 60% density. As I said, we increased the base heights of the building, which was around 6 to 10 stories, as well adding towers. So we really looked at sun and shadow as well as radiation study, which really looks at the contiguous hours of sunlight throughout the day, and key public realm areas such as the River Park, the Parkland area that's been built part of the Portland's flood protection, the Promontory Park, as well as some of the key streets, the north-south streets, which is Old Cherry Street, which will be lined with heritage buildings, the Keating Channel, the Water's Edge Promenade, were some of the key areas that we wanted to maintain sunlight. And as you know, as you raise the heights of the building, there will be more shadow impact. So we had to really balance which areas of the island should be taller. In general, we have a policy to not shadow at a certain time of the month and past a certain time on what we call the top of bank, which is along the river side. So what as a result, the height regime was putting more heights to the western part of the island, and then cascading down lower to the east portion of the island. So that's what's limited us to maintain that height in order to allow sunlight into the key public realm areas.
Thanks, Ray. And I know we also have some team members from Urban Design at the City on the line. I can't see everyone who's on, but if there's anyone that wants to also elaborate, there's a follow-up question, I should say, that's part of this, and then we'll go back to our previous question, which is why not distribute the increased density over all the buildings? I think that's sort of part of this same question in a way, so whoever wants to chime in.
Sure, I'll just weigh in on that.
Sure.
And I think the last question also had to do with capacity, right? So there are infrastructure limitations as well. That is actually setting the cap in terms of the 60% increase. So, and then I think Ray answered the question extremely well in terms of, we looked at a variety of dispositions for the building. We went to the design review panel, showed them some options, started to combine some of the options that they preferred, and then took into consideration things like sun access and things like proximity to transit to come up with the plan that's before you today.
Thanks to you both for tackling that. And then I just wanted to go back. So the clarification on that past question about affordable housing residences specifically geared to elders, both elders and the elderly. So it's a question about both around whether the affordable housing would include residences specifically geared to those groups.
Do you want me to jump in, Mira? Maybe
Sure,
I can
that would be great.
start. And if anybody, please also jump in. It's a bit early in the sense of like we don't have plans for implementation on Villiers and the affordable, how we're going to implement it, what development model we're going to use, what partners we're going to try to work with. But in general, what I wanted to say is that the city housing TO plan has specific target, both actually for seniors and Indigenous populations, right? So in all of our affordable housing projects to increase the supply of affordable housing, we always try to work with to provide affordable housing to priority equity deserving groups. Amongst those seniors, and we also have a specific dedicated target, and that a portion, 20% of our affordable housing target, we're aiming to have that done with our Indigenous partners, so in affordable housing by and for Indigenous communities. And so we expect that we will aspire to do something similar when we are thinking of how to implement the affordable housing on the island.
Thanks, appreciate that, Matthew. And is there anyone else on the team who wants to add something before we move to the next question? All right, so I have a question from Jamie about the expected construction period for the buildings. Aaron already spoke broadly to the timelines, but we can answer that question specifically around the date of, potentially the date of first occupation. This is all tentative, of course. And maybe Anthony or Eric, you want to address that one, or Jed? Team effort.
No, I was just going to say that Aaron mentioned that we'd like to have homes occupied by 2031. So working back from that, it would be the few years leading up to that. So hopefully under construction in the late 2020s with occupancy targeted for 2031.
Great. I know there was a lot of information in Aaron's answer, and this was a very specific question, so just worth kind of revisiting. So the next question is from Richard, and it's about whether there are plans in place to ensure bird migration between the Don Valley and the Spit remains unimpeded by tall towers. So Aaron, I think I will toss it to you for that one as well.
Perfect. Yeah, and I mean, I'll be brief and say that the City of Toronto's bird-friendly design guidelines, which are, I believe, part of the Toronto Green Standard, would apply to all of the buildings on the island. So we don't anticipate that there would be any issues with this. I'll also add that the design of the buildings themselves likely create less of a hazard for migrating birds and birds moving around through the area, because we're anticipating considerably less glazing, which typically creates issues for birds at night. And because we're going to be achieving improved thermal energy efficiency targets, we don't anticipate that there would be the degree of glass that you see in some other tall buildings in Toronto. So maybe I'll stop there, but happy to kind of follow up after the fact with other points.
Thanks, Aaron. The next question is a question specifically about helicopter and how the new heights of the buildings might impact that. The question is from Liz, and it says, how will the helicopters increased flights? How will the heliport's increased flights and helicopters affect this project? Are they going to limit the heights of buildings? Will the heights of buildings limit the helicopter business? And I noticed that further down in the chat, there are also questions generally about how the heights might be impacted by the airport flight paths. So I wonder if maybe I could ask Eric Serra with the city's waterfront secretariat to address both since they're related.
Sure. No
Yes.
problem. The helicopter operations have been in the Portland since 1998. We don't expect them to have any, or they don't have any impact on the heights of the buildings on Villiers Island. And the airport, we've been taking ongoing consultations with Ports Toronto and Transport Canada to discuss airspace issues over the Portlands and address potential concerns. The heights that we're proposing do adhere to federal airport zoning regulations, which are the regulatory tool for safeguarding the airspace around the airport. Ports has raised some concerns about areas outside of the AZR not sufficiently protecting the airspace, so we are continuing those discussions about those concerns. We're also collaborating with an independent aviation consultant to review the proposed heights against the existing instrument procedures. And we'll be reporting on that in our final recommendation.
Thanks, Eric. I now have a series of questions that are all related to community amenities, community facilities. So going to attempt to bundle them a little bit with apologies to my colleagues who are going to have to answer this multi-tiered question. We'll do our best here because I'm just conscious of the time and I want to make sure we address all of these questions to the best of our ability. So some questions about whether the public facilities should be centrally located within the community instead of at the edges as shown. And then the school backing onto the Keating Channel, is that the right location for a school? Should we not have it on the south riverside rather than against the straight drop into the channel? So 2 questions about where those facilities are proposed to be located, and I think either Ray or Anthony could probably start to speak to it.
I can start. So
Thanks,
we have been working with through our community facilities and services update. We have been working with the various service providers, including the Toronto District School Board, as well as Parks, Forestry and Recreation and the Toronto Public Library, on their facility needs with the anticipated population with the 60% increase. And there had a number of criteria for the selection of facilities. And some of those criteria were proximity to transit stations, proximity to especially when it comes to community centers or school sites, proximity to green space, especially park space. And the facility locations that have been brought forward currently are notional only, and they'd have to be confirmed as we're moving forward with development of the island. Because there is other considerations like co-location opportunities as well, of multiple community facilities and services within a single building, or a facility that could be co-located within a mixed-use residential building. So I would take the current map that we do have showing potential facility locations as notional, based upon the consultation that we've undertaken to date.
Thanks, Anthony. And I'll also just note that there are a couple of other questions around community facilities and services. I'm going to move past them for now with apologies, just because I want to make sure that we take advantage of the subject matter experts that we have here. And I know we're running short on time to address. We won't get through all your questions. There are a ton, which is really amazing to see how engaged everyone is. But we will answer them following this meeting thoroughly, for sure. So there's a question here, a specific question about from Pelin about the rationale for choosing to put towers on the western side of the island versus the mid-rise and short towers on the east. Ray already spoke to this a little bit in talking about kind of some of the decisions, the due diligence that guided where and how we can increase the density. But if there's anyone, again, from urban design at the city that wants to elaborate, we are here to talk about these results. So I want to make sure we dig into this.
Thanks for the question. I think Ray did allude to it, right? And also in answering the question, I talked about putting the height and the higher buildings in close proximity to transit. I think it's important to know that we're looking at densities here that are comparable to City Place as well. So I think that's important to know. But it was through a number of studies and consultation with the panel that we arrived at the building heights that we're presenting today, and a lot of what Ray had talked about as well in terms of sun access on the Eastern Park was part of that decision.
Thanks. Appreciate that. I can see that we're at time, so I'm going to address one final question, and it's one that I actually missed in the order and the flow of things. My apologies with all the scrolling. It was a question from Shelley asking who our Indigenous partners are. I think there are a number of ways to interpret that question depending on the project, but Fred, you'd be welcome to jump on and answer. Anthony, Jed, I think there are a number of folks who could speak to this, or even Eric as well. I think it depends on what project we're speaking about. Broadly, there are lots of different partnerships at play here. So it's a tough one to answer.
Yeah, I think Anthony had some technical issues near the end there, but I'm happy to jump in.
Sure.
So we've been working closely with a firm called Minokamik to help coordinate the next phase revitalization work. We also did some engagement in 2022 with about 10 different nations around First Nations around Toronto, and as part of our future engagement plans, we're bringing together a knowledge circle. So we're reaching out currently to put together that circle. We've been meeting with Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation as well regularly to provide updates on the project and discuss next steps. So we are casting a broad net as we're advancing this. As part of our circle, we're also looking at youth engagements as well as many of the organizations that work quite actively in Toronto, such as TASK and other Indigenous groups involved. So it is a pretty broad group that we're putting together and looking to hear from, as well as continue to work with.
Thanks, Eric. And I'm told that Fred might be having some mic issues as well. But what I will say is, what I think I've said this a number of times, because I'm so impressed with the number of questions. We will absolutely get to these all, and there will be opportunities to follow up. And in fact, if you've attended this evening and had a question asked and answered or not answered live, again, you'd be more than welcome to join us again on May 2nd, have an opportunity to talk with the team in person. I see Fred just popped camera on. Are you wanting to just give us some final words?
Well, thank you, Mira. Absolutely, yeah. And I think, partnering with many different groups, as Eric was rather good at putting together. This is work we need to continue, right? We need to definitely look at which partners, treaty partners, territorial, traditional partners that we can work with across the city, across many initiatives here, and most in particular housing, because again, as mentioned in many engagements that we've had, this access to water is very important. Historically, we've had only industrial, or say, the well-to-do who've had that access to that waterfront. And here we have this opportunity to really partner with Indigenous groups, urban Indigenous groups, First Nations, really share in that the beauty of this waterfront, and then actually from that extend more into economic development, sharing land, return of wealth and power as well to Indigenous groups. So yes, we will definitely be looking into many different partnerships across the, whether those are housing or economic development.
Thanks so much, Fred. And I think that is a great way to end. I can't tell you the amount of questions I'm scrolling through that we haven't gotten to. I really appreciate the interest, the time that everyone has taken to stick it out for those of you who did and are still on the meeting listening, to the counselor again for joining us, to our staff. And this is, as always, just one point in the conversation that we need to continue. We'll be taking a crack at answering all these questions. We'll do our best. It's likely a few weeks before the summary will be out, given the number of comments and questions that we have, and we'll make sure we circulate that, and also this recording to be posted on the YouTube channels as mentioned. So if you haven't filled out that survey and you still want to, it's open, and don't forget to scroll down to the bottom. You can opt to sign up to receive notifications from the counselor's office as well as from the project team's newsletter. So thanks so much again, and have a good evening, everyone.